Good to see you again.
Yeah, thank you for having this little natter.
Well, as I was saying, this conversation could go on for days. I've got so many questions. I don't know we've only got a short time. I wanted to ask about a lot of technical things, how you achieve some shots, how you go about the work. I know some of that, but wanted to explore that, and I also wanted to talk about what drew you to this work. How did you get into filmmaking and whatever? But I think that's going to take days. So the main thing I want to talk about is the story and the genesis of the story. And I think we might be able to get something in the half an hour that we've got.
Sure. Well, look, George, it started about 8 years ago with the death of my father. As you know, these things often begin with something significant. And Dad was a bit of a hoarder, a bit of a collector, and left behind three sheds full of things. And my siblings and I had to trawl through it all and sort the wheat from the chaff. And we were all very quite annoyed with him for having left behind this mess. And that really was the trigger, because that then led to sort of a fascination with why, as human beings, do we collect and fill our homes? Why are we like magpies? Compared to other species, I think the bowerbird's probably the only other animal that collects shiny objects like magpies. But I started to do a lot of research, and then of course extreme collecting is labelled as hoarding. And really, what is hoarding? What is the psychological reasons behind hoarding? And the more I read and I spoke to psychologists, the more I discovered that extreme hoarders, more often than not, have suffered a high degree of trauma or loss. And what's quite common is the loss of a child or a sibling or a twin in a very dramatic way. And that this hoarding and collecting becomes a coping mechanism for dealing with that trauma and loss. So that really fascinated me, but also at the same time, I was going through all my old notebooks and journals looking for ideas, and I came across some notes I'd made about a friend of mine who was born with a severe cleft palate. And as a little girl, she was horribly bullied and teased at school, yet grew up to be quite an extrovert, quite flamboyant, and she's actually now a fashion designer, and she's somewhat of a nudist too. She's always first to take her clothes off at a party, so so she's quite a colourful person. And so I sort of merged the two ideas, and like any writer, I sat down and draft after draft. I think I did about 16 drafts, and of course the best writing is rewriting, as you would know, George. And so eventually we ended up with this, and it started off memoir of a ladybird, and I wanted the lead character to collect anything that was to do with one sort of animal, but it was all getting a bit cutesy and twee and a bit saccharine. And of course, then that Ladybird film came out with Greta Gerwig, and that sort of destroyed that idea.
Yeah.
But so I went through the whole animal kingdom looking for the perfect animal or creature, and I settled on snails because I thought they're the introverts of the animal world. You touch their antennas and they retract into their shell. And also too, the beautiful swirl on a snail shell is such a beautiful symbol of life going full circle, very cyclic. And um, and also, I think they're quite elegant. I don't see them as slimy, or they're quite beautiful and alien-like. And then I discovered that snails can't reverse; they can only go forwards. And that linked really beautifully with the quote I wanted to use in the
Yeah.
film that Jackie Weaver reads, which is that it's the Søren Kierkegaard, the philosopher quote, that life
Yes.
can't be
Yeah.
understood backwards, but we have to live it forward. So there's all these little links to snails, and now I look back and I think, wow, it couldn't be any other animal.
That's so great. Look. So when I watched the film, what really, really struck me was how authentic it felt. I hear you watching basically stop motion animation, yet I was so engaged with the characters and their life stories. It felt, it came out of life. I mean, so I felt like at least it started off autobiographically, but you must have known a lot of those things. For instance, I grew up with a twin brother. We were never separated, but I identified so much with that, and but so many other things. People that I've encountered in my people I've known with cleft palates, people I've known who have also, in cult religions and abused children and disgraced people and people who suffer from melancholia and all those sort of things that happen. Not only in my life, but all others. And I felt that intense sense of observation, which really surprised me, just how engaged I was. It felt fearless to me. You confronted life, and that's a Herculean task when you think about it. When you're doing it with animation, I mean, you're actually working frame by frame, aren't you?
Yeah. Well,
And
I think too that I talk about density, and of course, I've always admired your films because they're so jam packed, and it's, you often get told, oh, you've got to pare it back and you've got to distill it, but I love really layering the films and having every form of comedy, satire and absurdism, and that can be risky. But I think you mentioned risk is that you have to take risks as a filmmaker, and particularly with subject matter in this film, I do tackle some challenging concepts and ideas and present the audience with moments that are confronting and eye-opening. But I think that's the duty of a writer, is to really keep the audience surprised, but at the same time, it is tricky to get that balance too of comedy and tragedy, and that's what I'm trying to do. But at the same time, as you mentioned, strive for authenticity and believability, and that even though these little characters, are blobs of clay, there's grace there.
yeah.
They're real, and that they have a soul and a heartbeat, and that they ring true for the audience. And I think that's what confounds the audience sometimes with my films, is they leave the cinema feeling emotionally exhausted, which is what I hope for. And a little surprised that they've become emotional. I was at a screening last night where there was a young woman who came out of the cinema, and she was quite distraught. I was quite concerned for her, and I went up and gave her a big hug, and realised there were tears of happiness. And it's a weird aspiration to have as a filmmaker, to want that reaction, but that's what I want when I go to see a film. I want a visceral reaction and come out. Well, I always say, if you're not an emotional wreck by the end of one of my films, then I've failed as a filmmaker.
Yeah. Well, I think every story worth its salt, any story that endures, has exactly those qualities that you're describing throughout all time and in all cultures. I think they have to have meaning, and they have to have heft, and they're stories that you want to go back to all the time. I know when I watched this film that came out of it, it was so rich that the first thing I wanted to do is go back and watch it again and enjoy, even just to read the titles of the books that I might have missed, or some of the details and things. And think about that. I mean, when you say a snail doesn't go backwards, I had no knowledge of that. But you said something of that in the characters, and how you tie it in with the quote about life and being lived forward and all that sort of stuff. I'm trying to think one. When you see what basically is foster parents abusing a child, and if you saw that in the movie, well, I know what I would be doing. I'd be thinking, oh, gee, what did the actor have to go through for that to happen? Why, why am I being shown that in a way that is it's not so much confronting, but it doesn't allow me to sit outside of it, to engage with it in a way that is not that it is still emotional, but somehow gets to the essence. I think going back to Scott McCloud, it somehow gets to some universal essence, and I think that's a function of all stories, one way or another.
I think intuition has a lot to do with it. I remember having a good chat with fellow Aussie Rolf de Heer and talking about just when it feels right. You think, you know what, that feels right to me. I think that will also resonate with the audience. And again, I think that's a primeval sort of sensation and explains a lot. I know when I see a film, I sometimes think, oh well, that didn't quite work, but I can see the director's intent. What was missing, and also too, getting back to Eyes, George, your films too. Of course, they're so dynamic, and yet I always love how you force the audience to connect with the characters looking at you, and I use the device, breaking the fourth wall a lot, where the character's suddenly staring at you, and that's very arresting, and it forces you to look back. And I also think too that somehow my films are like mirrors to people, and they also, you reflect a lot of your own self onto the characters. So in a way, the characters are little blank canvases, and it's interesting too. My characters don't have legs. And I get emails from people saying, "Oh, I love that moment where Grace, you can see her feet," and it's like, "Oh no, well, she doesn't actually have legs." So I think the audience invent quite often and fill in the gaps at times. And
are you saying that all your characters, none of them have legs?
Well, my budgets are so low that walking's very expensive, and
You're kidding me.
so we do the Muppet technique. So
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah,
so
I've never picked that up. That's amazing.
yeah, I mean, wide shots will have the character standing there, and you do see their legs, but we never actually walk them.
Yeah.
And also lip sync, we do very little talking. And I have to rely on narration a lot, which worries me, because as you know, voiceover can become a bit tiresome and repetitious. So I have a really good editor, Bill Murphy, and he and I are always pairing the script back, because of course there's that saying, show it, don't say it. Whereas in my films, it's a lot of saying and voiceover, which can be overbearing.
Do you call it claymation, or do you call it what do you
Well,
what's your preference?
We now call it stop motion. There was a very famous American animator, Will Vinton, and he trademarked the word claymation.
Yeah.
So I actually came up with my own word, George, clayography, which I'm proud to say is now on Wikipedia. And it's a combination, of course, of clayography, because my films are based on real people. But yeah, stop motion's the technical term, and we don't do any live action. So you can do a blend where sometimes you bring in a bit of live action, but yeah, we do either animate on ones or twos, a combination of both. And so yeah, it goes back to that mathematical equation that you need roughly 25 images per second flash before your eyes to create the illusion. And sadly, I think that's always going to be the case. That's science. That's what you need to create the illusion of movement. So yeah, it all comes back to mathematics.
Which anything to do, well, virtually everything, anything to do with rhythm or perception, and always, I find that same conversation I had with composers who basically can take some of their favorite music and actually have a mathematical representation of the progression of that. And you can argue the same way that film, which is ultimately driven by the intuition, but the intuition is very much fueled by the precision of the rational and the intellectual and so on. You storyboard. Do you do your own storyboards?
Yes, I still draw on paper actually. I tried doing storyboarding digitally, but my brain just didn't work when the digital pencil hit the glass. Something didn't click. Whereas lead pencil on paper, my brain seems to work better. So yes, this film has I think 1,500 hand drawn panels, and then we turn that into an animatic or a previs, as you probably call them, and then I move into the production design. So I'm very precious of how everything looks, and so I draw all the characters and design all the sets and the props, and I did all that during COVID, which was a bit of a blessing because I had a lot of time to do that. But I think as an auteur too, it's very important that I do involve myself in as many of the stages of the filmmaking process as possible. And I think as an animator, we are all megalomaniacs. We're all control freaks. And I think that's the allure of animation as well, is that we get to play God, and our characters can look however we want them to look. And control freaks, I think.
No, I think that's just doing the job. I mean, you have to. If you're otherwise, the magic, as you call it, would definitely not be there. I mean, bringing it to life. There's no question about that. So there's no apology for that. I mean, it becomes pathological when it gets in the way of the work, or when it becomes a kind of, when it becomes, when it gets in the way of the work or the engagement or the dignity of other people. But that, when I remember when I first started, people said, "George, you overthink it." And I thought, oh God, is this pathological? And then I realized, no, it's impossible to overthink it. Because finally, in the moment of doing, it's given over entirely to the intuitive response.
Oh, absolutely. That's I think that's the job of a director. Sadly, it's all encompassing. It takes over your whole life, and you wake up at 3 a.m. wondering, oh, did that blink we do yesterday, was that a convincing blink? Maybe we should do that blink.
I'm glad sort of things.
You don't have much of a life, but I think it's worth it in the end. For us, now that Memoir of the Snail is out there in the world, and I breathe a sigh of relief and think, oh, those 8 years of my life were worth it. And as I said, there was a woman who came up to me after a screening yesterday who was very emotional, and I comforted her, and as I said, there were tears, happy tears, and you think, well, that's why I make films. It's to nourish the audience. I don't want to just make them laugh. I don't want to depress them. I don't want to offend them, but I want to nourish them so that the film lingers when they leave. And your films certainly have done that as well, where they become part of people's lives, and that's a big responsibility as well. You realise as you get older, you think, wow, my work is actually, it has meaning, and that's very satisfying and humbling as well.
Look, it's fantastic talking. Again, if there's ever an opportunity to do this, it'd be fantastic, because I would. There is a lot more I'd like to know. I just didn't want to get too technical,
No,
and I
no.
think the more essential thing, the more fundamental thing is the storytelling, and to get some understanding of how you approach it is really great. And I learned a
Well,
lot.
thank you, George. And look, it's directors like you that have always inspired me and given me the courage and conviction and confidence to keep going. And as you know, there's not many of us in Australia, and so people like you have really led the way and made it a little easier for people like me. So thank you so much for this conversation, and I hope we catch up when we're back in Australia together.
Yeah, it'd be really good.
All
Yeah.
right.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you. It was
All
lovely.
the best, guys.